Valley's Gold is produced through a partnership between the Fresno County Farm Bureau and Valley PBS. Production of this program is made possible in part by a grant from E&J Gallo Winery.
Welcome to Valley's Gold. Well, we're going to take a look at the economic engine that drives this region, agriculture. My name is Ryan Jacobsen, and I'll be your host. Today we're talking grapes, table, wine, and raisin, and how they get from the vine to you. So join us on this grape-tastic adventure. Here at Valley's Gold, we're going behind the scenes of agriculture, and there's no better place to start than my own family's operation. We're here at L Vineyards, an operation that my dad and grandfather started back in 1980, the year I was born. With me here, I got my dad, Ray Jacobsen, and we're going to take a look at some of the vines we have here on the operation. So, starting out, Dad, let's talk a little bit about what we have going on here. We're in front of some Zinfandel grapes, and we're actually in the middle of harvest right now, so talk a little bit about what we have here and what we're doing.
What we've got here is these grapes right here is white Zinfandel grapes are being harvested for white Zinfandel. It's the same as red Zinfandel. They're harvested at a much lower sugar range there, and white Zinfandel wine's made out of this. If we let it go another 3% sugar more, they can make red Zinfandel wine out of it there. So this is what we've been harvesting since 10 o'clock last night. We harvested approximately 300 tons last night, and so we're winding up the day right now, and we'll go do it again tonight and finish up the Zinfandel, and then we'll move on to other varieties that is, numerous varieties as time goes along.
At this time, we're pretty excited. This year's crop's looking pretty decent. We got some gorgeous berries, as you can see here. As you can see, the Zinfandel, as we talk about the white Zinfandel, it's a clear juice this time of year. And as we let the sugar build up a little bit, and you see that red Zin, again, it's the same exact grape, you just get some additional sugar on it. So let's take a walk over here. We see what we have here is the trellis system in which this row has obviously not been harvested. We're in the middle of harvest. This row will be harvested actually tonight. But as we go over here, we look at a row that we actually have harvested. And as you can see, the berries have been completely stripped from the vine here. And these were off to the winery here this morning. So we're gonna actually walk towards the machine that we use to pick these grapes, and maybe talk a little bit about what this harvester does, and how successful it is as far as pulling that many tons off a night.
We'll take a look right here. This machine here is set in the row and ready to go, and as soon as I give the word for them, they'll start the head up, which shakes it at approximately 300 to 320 RPMs per minute there, just shattering the grapes off the vines. They will drop down, they will come back on conveyors, go up to a fan housing that is going to blow all the leaves and the canes out, and there they go up the sides, and from that point there, they're transferred over into the gondola. And the gondola, when it gets full, will then be taken to the truck to be dumped. And when we get basically 4 gondolas dumped, that it will be approximately 24 tons, the legal truck limit, and it will be on its way to the winery just as quick as we get the 4 gondolas dumped on the truck there. So,
and now that we've explained it, it's one of those things that it's much easier to see this rather than actually talk about it. So why don't we go ahead and start the machine up?
Yeah, okay.
Like all farmers and ranchers, we can't bring the harvest in without our employees. And with me right here, I have Leopoldo Altamirano, who has actually been with the operation longer than I've been alive. He started with my grandfather when he was 18 and has spent the last 34 years here with our operation. And Leopoldo, talk a little bit about your experience here on the farm and what you do for us.
Well, I do everything here. I start working when I'm a young. I start pruning, driving tractor, driving truck, and holding all the people. Teach other people how they got to pruning, how they got to do the job, and everything there.
Yeah, Leopoldo is one of those on our operation now that does a heck of a job of working with the folks. So that, I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions out there when it comes to agriculture about being low skilled work. Actually, it's very skilled work. You make a mistake when you're pruning, we don't have this year's crop. When you start the cultural practices in the spring, the thinning process, everything else, mistakes are very, very costly. And so Leopoldo makes sure everything's done correctly. He's our eyes and ears in the field to make sure everything's going as well as it possibly can for the upcoming year. And this time of year, he's one of our truck drivers. He takes the product that we've seen here, harvested here a little bit ago, and takes it off to the winery. Here in the San Joaquin Valley, within a 60-mile radius of the city of Fresno, 99% of the nation's raisins are grown, and over 50% of the world's supply. Most people are pretty familiar with the Thompson Seedless. It's one of the most versatile grapes we produce here in the sense that it's a majority of the raisins we produce. It also goes towards table and towards concentrate purposes. But here at J&L in Easton, we do things a little bit differently. We have a different kind of raisin. I'm gonna have my dad Ray talk a little bit about that.
Well, we go back a number of years ago. These grapes were converted over, grafted over to flame seedless and replanted some of them there. And we used to make a lot of table grapes out of the flames and out of the Thompsons. A number of years ago, we decided not to have all the input and high labor costs and everything requirements there. So we switched over to making raisins out of them there. So we still traditionally lay them down by hand on individual trays, and we do that early in the season because flames get sugar much ahead of the other varieties. So we make raisins out of them. It makes a very good raisin. We get them harvested early, and to me it makes an excellent raisin. So that's why we do this here. Beautiful crop, and until we decide to replant with something else, we're making the raisins, and like I say, it makes a very good raisin there. Really enjoy doing it.
As you may notice, it's a little bit smaller than what you'll typically see for a flame seedless in the supermarket. But that's because it's the natural variant. We don't go for as much size as we do for a table grape. We're actually looking for more of the natural bunch, and so this is what you see here. It's absolutely a gorgeous tasting flame. The color is spectacular, and as we see here, we got a little bit of an example from last year's crop. We have some of the raisins, and as you'll see, it's a lot darker variant than what you typically see with a Thompson Seedless. And at the same time, you'll see a little bit of additional size there. So it's a raisin we're quite proud of, and it's a raisin that ultimately ends up in plates all over the world. What we saw over in the flames was essentially how raisins have been grown for the last 150 years. We've now actually come to another part of our field where we have some Selma peats, and you're gonna notice right away something's a little bit different here. This is what we call our overhead trellis system. And essentially for about 150 years, we laid a majority of the raisins in the valley here on the ground, dried them naturally by the sun, and let Mother Nature take its course. Well, here we're doing something a little bit different. This is a new system that actually helps alleviate some of the labor concerns that comes during that time of year, and it's a new system that essentially has been around for about 10 years or so. So I'm gonna have my dad Ray talk a little bit about what we're seeing here and talk about the beauty of the grapes as they hang from over us rather than the conventional trellis system that we typically see.
Okay, what we have here, we're gonna have a raisin that's gonna take 2 to 3 times as long or even more times to dry. But we're gonna come in here in approximately a week's time, as soon as the sugar level gets to a certain point, and we're gonna cut these canes and we're gonna let Mother Nature dry these without having to cut them off by hand or anything there. So it will take approximately 6 to 8 weeks for these grapes to turn into raisins once we cut off the energy supply to these bunches in these long overhead canes here. And
the reason that it takes so much longer to dry these is because of the canopy system we see on top of us. Rather than laying them on a tray where the sun gets directly to the tray, you have a canopy system to burn through, and that canopy system actually takes a few weeks to dry off before the grapes really start to dry.
Because the leaves will still be surrounded around there. The leaves will have to dry away, and the energy will be cut inside these bunches, so there's not a lot of sunlight that's going to get to these raisins till later when all the leaves are dried up and blown away, or at least a little more sunlight in here, but they will be going through the drying process and curing for raisins at that point there.
And actually what we see, you'll probably see on the right behind you on the camera here, is we actually have the drip system going right now. This is actually going to be these vines' last drink before these canes are cut here. And so we're at the pre-irrigation right before the harvest starts here, and so we're giving them one last drink to the vines, and they will go off for a little bit as we go through and start the curing process for the raisins here. So as we move out of the grapes here, you're actually going to see that we're going to go to the next row that doesn't have the raisins that you've seen in this row. And what we're going to see here is you see a vine row that's actually blank. And the reason for that is, if you want to talk about that.
Well, on the overhead system there, the grapes come off of second year wood. So what we will do is, this was the same as the other row last year. We cut all those canes off. We are growing new canes for next year's crop. So these are our replacement canes that will have the grapes on them next year. And those, once the raisins are harvested with a mechanical harvester, we will come and remove all the dead canes there and shred them into the ground there. And this will be the row that will have our crop for next year. So kind of what you see in the other row is what this row will look like next year at approximately the same time here.
And talk a little bit about the cultural practice of this. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into making this next year's crop.
Yes, once these canes are all grown through for the season and they go dormant later when frost time comes there, we will come through with crews and we will prune and basically leave 4 or 5 good fruit canes to grow for next year there, and they will be tied and spread out, so everything will be prepped for next year to make an even distribution on the bunches for next year at this same time.
And that's a good tip for those homeowners that have grapevines in their backyard. We talked about 4 to 5 canes. A lot of homeowners want to know why they don't get the size of the bunches or the size of the grapes. And a lot of it has to do is making sure that pruning is done right, making sure you don't leave too much exposed there, because it will make it very difficult for that vine to produce fruit of the adequate size there. Now, we did cheat a little bit. We aren't necessarily cut the canes yet, but we did go ahead and do a sample for you for about a week ago. About a week ago, we went in and cut these canes, and so we get to take a look at what this starts to look like a week after we've cut those canes, and as those vines actually go through the drying system here. So what you see here is the actual canopy has begun to dry, and these leaves become very crunchy at this point. And you'll see the grapes. The grapes haven't changed a whole lot. You see a little bit of wilt in there, but for the most part, the grapes look pretty similar. But the most important thing is to burn this canopy off first, and then you'll see these grapes starting to go through the drying process.
And if you'll notice, the stems have already lost their green look, so the energy from the mother vine is already been cut to there. So the stems will dry first, and then the berries will just start their dehydration process through the sun, the heat, and just the time it takes to dissipate the moisture. And raisins are about a 4.5 to 1 dry ratio. So each 4.5 pounds of grapes you have should make 1 pound of raisins. And that's what's going to take place on the next 6 to 8 weeks.
So there you have it. This is one of the processes, one of the types of ways of making probably one of the San Joaquin Valley's most famous crops, the California raisin. Raisins are one of the oldest crops in the San Joaquin Valley, filled with a very, very rich history. With me here, I have Elizabeth Lavelle, who's going to talk a little bit about that rich history.
Oh, Ryan, grapes and raisins been in the county for so long. In fact, the first grapes you can see here actually grew wild around the river bottoms. And what happened is, as farmers started to take the water away from the rivers, the grapes that grew wild, and actually they were harvested by the Yokuts Indians here, the Native Americans, and the people that had settled thought that was wonderful and that they decided to try and replicate that. But the wild grapes did kind of die out, so people started actually planting their own. And the establishment of commercial vineyards in Fresno County began with the arrival of the Swedish brothers. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Okay, and their names were Francis and Gustav Eisen, and they came around 1873. And so Dr. Gustav Eisen was really, really experimental. He liked to try different things, and so pretty soon he was developing all kinds of new techniques for table, raisin, and wine grapes. It was really fun. So after that happened, people started to colonize and grow like 40-acre plots, and of course our most two famous vineyards and colonies, as they were called, were the Barton Vineyards. They were in the east.
Yep.
And over here in the west, you know who it was?
Kearney.
Kearney. And Theo Kearney started that colony farm system. We're going to learn more about that later in this season. But people started to try and develop grapes. So here you have a photo from Pop from about 1916, and really Pop liked the grapes and he liked the guys, but he was way more impressed by the mules because they were standing patiently, which mules are not known to do in all cases.
They are not known to do.
They just would bring the boxes right out into the field and package. This is actually called Roding Ranch. It's a name that's pretty familiar to folks here.
The thing that amazes me is when you look at the 1873 is how fast things developed after that point.
That's right.
Because I look at my family's history. Actually, believe it or not, my family's history, we actually started about the mid-1880s is about when my family came over on the Jacobsen side, and we actually came over specifically for the raisins.
Well, because it started to grow and it grew well.
Yes.
And so there weren't a lot of places in the country that could call the kind of fertile soil, the right climate, all the elements really with the sun. There was a great growing period, and that's why people turned to grapes and then later to raisins. So here we have a very bare vineyard, and again, we have our families that farmed here putting this together. This was a 2-year vineyard, actually. So you can see it's not very fertile yet. They had a long time before they were going to get grapes on there. But before they even got there, this land is so hard, and it was so difficult to get things out of it. And this was some kind of machine they had put together called a stump puller. So all the trees that had to be cut down, they couldn't get the stumps out, so they turned to this machine. It was kind of fun. And then here you can see early days tilling. Why don't you tell me what they're doing here?
Well, it looks like, yeah, exactly. It looks like it's pretty close to what we do as far as disking, but it was obviously a whole lot more of an older relic at that point. So it's incredible to see that machinery and just know that, you know, what they did in those days. I mean, we are so spoiled by the equipment we have today.
It makes such a difference. And, you know, so much equipment, not just in grapes and raisins, but in all kinds of areas, cotton especially, the equipment was developed right here in the valley.
Absolutely.
Because there was a need, and farmers were super good at tinkering, and actually that translated over into airplanes. Early aviation history had a lot of things happening here in the valley because folks that worked on the farms were really good at tinkering in airplanes as well, so that was kind of fun. So here you are in the field, you've got your crop, and you've got your guy, he's going to cut these, and of course we know what he's going to do with that.
And just, I mean, from the look of it, it actually looks like it might be a muscat grape. It looks very close to that, so that's neat.
And then the next thing is something we still see today. Something's changed, some things look very similar. And here you have the grapes on the ground turning into raisins. And on these kinds of wooden trays, traditional wooden trays, how long would it take from the time these guys were cutting till these raisins were ready to go?
These probably dried fairly quickly just because they're in the wide open. Don't worry about leaves covering them and everything else. So it probably took anywhere from 7 to 14 days depending on what time of year and what the temperature was.
And a lot of manpower.
Ton of manpower.
Manpower to get them on the ground and then manpower to take them away.
Yeah.
And if you look here at this picture, this is one of my very favorites. You can see these guys. Where are they going with those? Those are raisins in the boxes.
Yep. It looks like the raisins are packed up in the sweat boxes and headed off to the packing house.
That's it. Or if you were really lucky, you got to just come out here and grab them off the vines and enjoy them just like we were today.
Absolutely.
So Ryan, what's even more exciting is that Pop Laval was able to capture in footage and even in film all of our valley crops and what happens to them after they leave the fields. And in future episodes, we're going to be able to take a look at that.
What a journey it's been the past 150 years, from the wild vines to what we've seen today. I look forward to learning more. California table grapes are the best to be found in the world, and there's a reason for that. It's because of people like Sandy Dillard with the Fresno County Agricultural Commissioner's Office, who actually goes out and tests the grapes for maturity levels. Sandy, thanks for coming. Talk a little bit about what you do to make sure those grapes are ready to go to the supermarket.
Okay, what I do is I go out to different fields, for table grape packing, and I take a maturity testing. I will pull for so many boxes, and then I will pick from them. I will go through a process of smashing, check the sugar reading with a refractometer, and I also will do different testing if things are not right. What I do this for, and I'm actually extra help for Fresno County Ag Department, and what I do is I do this for the consumers and also the farmers. I just help them out in that way.
And I know you're not testing just for sugar. Obviously, sweetness is a big part of the California table grape and why it's world-renowned for everything. But what else are you exactly looking for?
Well, we also look for defect, which would be like waterberry, which is a mushy berry, the grape itself, and raisin berry. We also look for rot, decay, and maybe even insects that would penetrate the flesh of the berry. But it takes an awful lot, a percentage, to actually, actually turn over the load or the product because of that. You never hardly ever see that, but we do also check for defects.
Well, Sandy, about how many vineyards will you visit in a day?
In a day, all depending on, I can go up to a total of 18 or more. It all depends how long I am at a field. If there's no problems, of course, I can get faster to different fields. If there is a problem, then it just takes a little longer. So it can vary. It can vary.
You put on a lot of miles every day, I assume, then?
Yes, we can. A lot. Mm-hmm.
Well, good. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sandy. It was great to learn from you, and that's what makes California table grapes so special.
Well, thank you.
We looked at raisin and wine grapes so far, and we've moved on to table. With me, I have Richard and George Matoyan, who's here in their family's field to talk about their operation. Jay, thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks, Ryan.
Well, Richard, first off, we talked about myself a little bit having a day job. You guys both have day jobs.
Yeah, we sure do. The farming operation is not of an economic size for us to be fully farmers. So both of us have day jobs, and we always say the day job allows us to have the weekend job in farming.
Well, that's great. I know your guys' family operation has been around for quite a number of years. Talk a little bit about your family.
Sure. My grandfather and father immigrated from Armenia here directly into Fresno County, and their first ranch was a 10-acre farm just about 5 miles as a crow flies from here, and they started growing vegetables initially, and then eventually started growing grapes.
Okay.
And over the years, that's evolved to where my brother and I have gotten involved. In the last 15 years or so now, we've been growing table grapes.
Well, I am incredibly impressed as I walked out here. You can see just a bounty of gorgeous table grapes going on here. George, let's talk a little bit about this. First off, I love to show folks the difference between the fact that these were some of the natural Thompsons I took from actually my place. And this is the same exact vine, same exact type of fruit here, the same variety. And of course we have a major difference going on here. Kind of a size difference, color difference, a little bit of everything. So it's hard to believe it's the exact same grape. Why don't you talk about what you guys do to make that difference?
Right. Well, Ryan, first of all, we spend a lot of money. And spend a lot of money with the fertilizer, and especially with a lot of the hand labor.
Yeah.
And what we really like to do with the Thompson crop, since it's generally a pretty bountiful crop to begin with, we'll go through and take bunches off early on. We'll also go through and thin each bunch to a certain size. And then we'll increase the fertilization program, potassium, calcium, or whatever the vine needs. And
this is the result of it.
Yeah, you talked about that cultural practice. Definitely know the difference. You guys are doing a lot more hand labor than we do on these here. One thing I also like to always point out to folks is the girdling process. It's a process that's really unique in the sense that it does help bring on that size. At the same time, it's not something I would recommend for folks doing at home because it can kill the vine. But talk about that a little bit.
That's true. Actually, girdling the vine will shorten the life of the vine, but it makes economic sense for us to do it. At berry set, during the springtime, when the berries actually set on the grape at a very early stage, we'll go through and make a cut all the way around the trunk. And it's just on the outer portion of the trunk into a white portion of the trunk. And what that does, it'll increase the carbohydrates and nutrients up into the vine for about 10 to 14 days, and then the cut will heal and the vine will resume the normal photosynthesis.
Wow, okay. And then we're going to take this bunch right here. I mean, essentially, that the individual grower and picker comes into the field here, takes this bunch off and puts it onto a tray, and we're going to take it to the end of the row and see what happens next.
Great.
Okay, we've seen the grapes on the vine. Now we have to see how they make them to the consumer. George, talk about this process that's going on behind us here.
We are out in the field, and each bunch is hand selected and trimmed for any defects. And the grapes then are brought out to the end of the row, and this is where the grapes actually go into the packing process. We're packing these grapes in what we call a stand-up pouch bag. This has become very popular in the last couple of years. It's a little bit more of an expensive bag, but on the grocery shelf to the housewife, it makes a very attractive package, especially if you have beautiful grapes like these in the bag.
Now talk a little bit about your label here. I know that has some significance.
Exactly. This label is, we've been using it for maybe around the last 16 years, and it's named after our mom, and it's a little tribute, and so it's been a very popular label for us and in the marketplace also.
Now we're talking about the significance of what labor plays into what you're doing here. There's a lot of people doing a lot of work right now. Talk about that time frame, how long it takes to get the grapes from the field out to the end here, and how long it takes to pack them.
We actually start the picking process around 5:30 in the morning. Some of the first pallets are ready, I would say, by 7 in the morning. Then it's loaded into a refrigerator truck. And once the truck is full, that'll be around 10 a.m. It's taken to a cold storage, and the cold storage then starts the cooling process. And within around 6 hours, the grapes are cooled down to 33 to 34 degrees, and they're ready for shipment to the grocery store.
One of the fun facts is that just outside of Easton here, these grapes are going to end up actually all over the world. Talk about where your grapes are going to go.
Actually, some of these grapes will stay in the local market area, but a majority of them will go into markets into Canada, Mexico. We'll ship them into the UK, Hong Kong, Philippines, Taiwan, wherever there's a demand for this type of grape.
Okay, well great, George. I appreciate you showing us around your farm, and like I said, we understand a little bit better why California grapes are some of the best to be found.
Great, thank you.
From the California sunshine to your home, there's no other crop more synonymous with Central Valley agriculture than the grape. Whether it's sipping a glass of wine or enjoying nature's candy, they're all part of our valley's gold. I hope you'll join us next time.
Valley's Gold is produced through a partnership between the Fresno County Farm Bureau and Valley PBS. Production of this program is made possible in part by a grant from E&J Gallo Winery.